Imagine, 193 people agree to a massive group project to save the world.
Sounds like a logistical nightmare already.
Right. I mean, they draft up a syllabus, they sign the contracts, they shake hands, and they take all the smiling press photos.
Yeah, lots of photos.
Exactly. Now imagine it's a few years before the absolute final deadline, and half the group is just like, stop sharing their notes. They stop showing up to the meetings and flat out refuse to open their wallets to pay for the materials.
Which is pretty much where we are at right now.
Yeah. Welcome to Mission Green, part of our Project Plain Talk series. Today, we are looking right at you. The generation currently sitting in lecture halls, pulling all-nighters and getting ready to inherit a world that is in the middle of a massive, messy transition.
And it really is a transition phase.
Absolutely. We are taking the noise of global policy and breaking it down into what actually matters for the people who will be stepping into these industries.
It's a vital conversation to have right now. I mean, the decisions and, frankly, the indecisions happening today at the international level, they're going to completely rewire the job markets.
Oh, for sure.
The global economy and, the literal physical infrastructure of the cities you're going to live in.
Okay, let's unpack this.
Yeah.
Our foundation today for this deep dive is the newly released 2026 Sustainable Development Report. It's subtitled Implementing Sustainable Development, 2030 and Beyond, fresh from Dublin University Press.
Right.
Back in 2015, the 193 member states of the United Nations made the most comprehensive moral and political commitment in human history. The Sustainable Development Goals, or SDGs.
The big ones.
Yeah, the objective was basically to eradicate extreme poverty and stabilize the planet's climate by 2030. Spoiler alert for anyone checking their calendars, we are absolutely not going to make that deadline.
No, not even close, sadly.
So what went wrong? And how do we build a new playbook?
Well, to figure out the new playbook, we really have to look at the current scoreboard. And the data in this 2026 report lays out a pretty harsh reality. On a global average, progress is just stalling out.
It's just flatlining.
Yeah. We are seeing the spread of armed conflicts, the impacts of climate change are, accelerating way faster than our infrastructure can adapt. And the basic foundational norms of international cooperation are fracturing.
But I'm looking through this data, and it's not a uniform collapse, right? There's some massive regional contrasts here.
Exactly. The picture changes entirely depending on where you look. I mean, since 2015, East and South Asia have outperformed every other region on the planet.
Really?
Yeah, in terms of making progress on these global goals. And when you look at the major powers driving that region, the statistical gains are enormous. China has risen 14 places in its global index ranking.
Wow.
And India has surged forward by 18 places. They are seeing tangible physical momentum in their infrastructure and poverty metrics.
Wait, jumping 18 places for a country with the population density and the sheer scale of India. Is that just because they started from a lower baseline of development, or are they genuinely executing these massive policies better than the West right now?
It's heavily weighted toward execution. They are actively mobilizing state resources to hit these infrastructure targets.
Okay.
Because when you flip the coin and look at the survey respondents in Latin America, the Caribbean, and North America, they reported highly negative trends over the past few years.
Yeah, that makes sense.
There is a palpable feeling of regression in the West, which leads directly into, the political reality of how these goals are managed.
Right, the politics. Because the report documents the voting records at the UN General Assembly, which is basically the tracking mechanism for this massive 193-person group project.
Yeah.
And there's a fascinating split.
Yeah, it's very telling.
The broad consensus around the ideas, like clean water and tech access, has near unanimous support. But when it comes to actual resolutions on multilateralism, which is just, a fancy word for doing the global homework together, there are glaring statistical outliers.
Yes. The vast majority of the world consistently votes in favor of these UN resolutions, but the United States and Argentina are systematically voting against them.
Just straight up voting no.
Exactly. In fact, by January 2026, the U.S. federal government had formally withdrawn from over 60 international organizations.
Wow, 60.
Yeah, they currently sit dead last globally in their support for UN-based multilateralism.
And on the complete opposite end of the spectrum, you have Barbados, a small island developing state, and they're ranking #1 globally for supporting that exact same system. It's a wild divergence.
It really is.
So is this like a massive university group project where one half of the team is doing all the reading and the other half suddenly decides they don't want to use the syllabus anymore? Are the goals themselves just too ambitious?
What's fascinating here is that the ambition of the goals isn't the roadblock. The consensus on what we want the world to look like remains globally durable.
Right, like nobody wants dirty water.
Exactly. Nobody is actively arguing for more extreme poverty or dirtier air. The core problem is that the world is not structurally organized to achieve the goals. The execution is fractured.
So going back to that group project analogy, it's not that the syllabus is wrong, it's that the group refuses to coordinate their schedules and nobody wants to actually do the hard assignments.
Exactly. The vision is there, but the operational mechanics are totally broken.
Which begs the question, if the vast majority of the world genuinely agrees on the syllabus, why are we collectively failing the class?
Right.
The report pulls data from the 2026 SDSN large-scale survey, where they asked global experts to identify the true bottlenecks. And I'll admit my assumption going in was entirely wrong.
Oh, yeah. What did you think the bottleneck was?
I assumed it was a hardware problem. Like, we just don't have the sci-fi tech yet, right? The solar panels aren't efficient enough, the battery storage isn't there, or carbon capture is just too clunky.
That's a very common misconception.
But the experts in the survey completely dismissed that. Only 65% cited a lack of access to technologies as a primary barrier, which puts it near the very bottom of their concerns.
Right, because the real killers of progress aren't technological. They are governance failures.
Yeah.
89% of these experts point to the failure to implement already approved strategies.
That's crazy. So we have the plans.
We have the technology. In many cases, we even have the signed, legally binding action plans. We just refuse to execute them. And another 87% point to the shifting geopolitical landscape as a primary barrier.
And you can actually track that geopolitical shift in the rhetoric. I mean, the shift in how leaders talk about this is wild.
Oh, absolutely.
In 2023, 64% of heads of state mentioned the global sustainability goals in their official speeches. But by 2025, that plummeted to just 38.5%.
That is a massive drop.
It's almost like they realized how much work it would take, and they just quietly stopped talking about it, hoping nobody would notice.
Well, and when leaders stop talking about a priority, the bureaucratic machinery behind them grinds to a halt. But to truly understand why execution is so difficult for a government, we have to borrow a concept from economic theory.
Okay.
There is a principle highlighted in the report called Tinbergen's principle, named after John Tinbergen, who won the first Nobel Prize in economics.
Oh, I love a good Nobel laureate theory. Lay it on us. How does this explain the execution gap?
So Tinbergen's principle is wonderfully straightforward. It states that if a government has a specific number of independent policy targets, let's just call that number N.
Okay, N targets.
Right. Then it must wield at least N independent policy instruments to achieve them.
So to bring back our university analogy, you can't pass 5 completely different final exams by only studying one generalized textbook. If you have 5 exams, you need 5 specific textbooks.
That's a perfect way to look at it. You cannot fix universal education, decarbonize a national energy grid, and solve agricultural food security using just one generic policy lever.
Like a broad tax cut or something.
Exactly, or a vague regulatory bill. The instruments must be painstakingly aligned with the targets. The sustainability goals are a massive list of highly specific global targets, but governments have flat out failed to mobilize the sheer number of distinct, coordinated policy instruments required to actually do the work.
Well, here's where it gets really interesting and frankly kind of infuriating. The report notes that 80% of the countries surveyed have adopted some form of overarching national strategy for these goals.
Yes.
Like they have the massive glossy binder sitting on the shelf, but only 15% actually include associated line item budgets for these goals in their national spending.
It's amazing.
Wait, only 15%. Are you saying 85% of the world's governments are essentially drafting these massive master plans for good PR with absolutely zero intention of paying for them?
That is the execution gap quantified. A strategy without a budget is literally nothing but a wish list.
Yeah.
And the reason this happens comes down to political incentives. Implementing N-specific policy instruments requires long-term financing that bridges across traditional government silos. Health, energy, transport.
Right, and politicians don't like long-term.
Exactly. Political leaders operate on short-term election cycles. Committing billions to a 10-year grid overhaul doesn't always win an election that's happening in 2 years. So they write the report, take the photo, and withhold the checkbook.
So how do we force them to open the checkbook? Because right now, national governments are world-class at writing reports and terrible at writing checks. Where is the accountability mechanism?
Well, the report advocates for a total restructuring of how we organize the effort. Instead of trying to tackle 17 separate, overwhelming goals in isolation, they suggest organizing the actual implementation around 6 interconnected transformations.
Yeah. And if you're looking at where the future of global policy is heading, you need to know these 6.
Oh.
They are education, health, clean energy, sustainable food systems, sustainable cities, and the digital revolution.
The logic here is systemic efficiency. If you achieve breakthroughs in the digital revolution, you instantly provide the data infrastructure that supports better health tracking
Right. They feed into each other.
and smart management of a clean energy grid. They act as force multipliers for each other, which reduces the number of separate policy instruments a government has to invent from scratch.
And to track if a government is actually doing this, there's a reporting system. The traditional method is the VNR, the Voluntary National Review, which is basically a whole country going to the UN and saying, here is our progress.
Right.
But the report highlights something much more compelling to me, which is the VLR, the Voluntary Local Review.
Yes, and this raises an important question about where the actual leverage for change exists today. Because if the national level is bogged down by geopolitics and gridlock, the subnational level, the cities, states, and provinces, is rapidly accelerating.
The stats prove it. Between 2024 and 2025, the number of voluntary local reviews submitted surged by 69%.
It's a huge spike.
And this isn't just a handful of wealthy Western cities. Almost half of all these local action plans are being driven by cities in Brazil, Malaysia, Mexico, and Argentina. Brazil alone submitted 72 of them.
And a VLR isn't just a PR document. When a mayor submits a local review, they're often detailing actual physical changes. A national president signs a pledge to reduce carbon emissions, sure, but who actually has to sit down and rezone the neighborhoods to reduce urban commute times?
The city planners.
Right. Who navigates the municipal budget to buy a fleet of electric buses? Who negotiates the contracts to upgrade the local waste management systems? It's the mayors and the city councils. Subnational authorities are the ones forcing the practical changes that national frameworks only talk about.
But even at the local or national level, how do you verify they're actually doing it? I mean, I could submit a local review saying I'm going to buy 1,000 electric buses, but without a budget, we're back to Tinbergen's problem.
That's where we are seeing the rise of Supreme Audit Institutions, or SAIs. These are independent government watchdogs stepping in to evaluate preparedness.
Oh, like an actual audit.
Yes. The report highlights how Canada's Auditor General did this back in 2018. They didn't just ask, do you support the goals? They conducted a hard audit on the government's mechanical preparedness.
How does an auditor actually test for preparedness on something this broad?
They look for the mechanics of execution. They look at the national budget to see if specific line items exist. They look at the organizational chart to see if clear chains of command are designated.
So if nobody is specifically in charge?
If a goal exists but no specific agency is legally responsible for it or no money is allocated to it, the government fails the audit. It forces absolute transparency on that execution gap.
So if national governments are constantly failing these audits and dropping the ball, and local mayors in Brazil and Malaysia are the ones buying the buses and rezoning the grids, wait, I mean, what happens when we inevitably blow past this 2030 deadline? Does the UN just hand the reins over to the mayors, or is there a new playbook?
The framework absolutely has to evolve. The report outlines 8 specific priorities, lessons we've basically learned the hard way, that must shape the post-2030 reality. And these aren't minor tweaks. They are structural overhauls of how the global economy operates.
I want to dive deep into 2 of these specific priorities, because these are the massive systemic shifts that will define the careers of anyone entering the workforce right now. So there's redirecting military expenditures to human development, global governance for AI and biotech, establishing new UN campuses in Asia, Africa, and Latin America.
All crucial.
But the first one that really caught my eye is introducing new global taxes to finance public goods. And this isn't theoretical. The report talks about the International Maritime Organization and the near miss of a global carbon levy. How would that have actually worked if it hadn't been blocked?
It's a brilliant example of a new policy instrument. The idea was to put a tiny, almost imperceptible tax on the greenhouse gas emissions of ocean shipping.
Okay.
Think about the millions of shipping containers crossing the ocean every day, carrying sneakers, electronics, cars. By putting a fractional levy on that fuel consumption, the cost to the end consumer is practically zero.
But it adds up.
But aggregated globally across the entire maritime industry, it generates billions and billions of dollars every year.
And that money bypasses national gridlock and goes straight into funding clean energy transitions for developing nations.
Right.
It solves the budget problem.
Precisely. It creates an independent, predictable revenue stream that isn't reliant on a national politician surviving their next election. It treats the global ocean as a shared resource with a shared tax base. Now, it was blocked in recent negotiations, but the mechanism is exactly the kind of structural innovation we need for 2030 and beyond.
The second priority that blew my mind is the mandate for transnational infrastructure, specifically establishing interconnected regional power grids. The report makes it clear that you simply cannot solve the clean energy puzzle on a country-by-country basis.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, it's really an issue of physics. The transition relies heavily on wind and solar, which are inherently intermittent. The sun sets, the wind stops.
Right. If you only have solar panels on your own roof and a cloud rolls in, your house goes dark. You have to be able to pull power from somewhere else.
Exactly. Now zoom that out to a national level. If a country only relies on its own borders for renewable generation, it's incredibly vulnerable.
Yeah, that makes sense.
To solve this, the report emphasizes building massive cross-border regional grids. Think of a fully interconnected power grid across the entire African continent or across the ASEAN nations in Southeast Asia.
That is massive.
That way, if the sun is setting in one time zone, they can pull solar power from a time zone where the sun is still peaking.
Yeah.
If the wind dies down on the coast, they pull hydroelectric power from the interior.
But the sheer logistics of that, I mean, you're talking about standardizing electrical grids across 20 different sovereign borders, negotiating transnational pricing models, and navigating the geopolitics of energy security.
Yes. It requires a level of transnational planning, financing, and cooperation that makes a simple national action plan look like child's play.
So, what does this all mean for you listening to this right now? It means this is your literal future. When they talk about establishing global governance for AI, or designing global taxation mechanisms for maritime shipping, or engineering a trans-African renewable energy grid, these are the exact battlegrounds where global sustainability will be won or lost.
It's a huge opportunity.
The world doesn't need more people to agree that climate change is bad. They need economists who understand Tinbergen's principle to write the budgets. They need urban planners who can draft a voluntary local review and rezone a city. They need engineers and tech ethicists who can build transnational systems. The syllabus has already been written, but the jobs required to actually execute it are waiting for you.
It is a call for an unprecedented professional mobilization. The original 2015 agenda was perhaps, well, a bit naive in thinking we could just declare these moral goals and expect the existing sluggish bureaucracies to somehow handle it.
Yeah, just hoping it works out.
The post-2030 reality is entirely about building the specialized machinery and training the specialized people to force it into reality.
Let's bring all of this together. The core takeaway from this deep dive into the 2026 report is that our global ambitions are not the problem. Eradicating poverty, building equitable societies, stabilizing the climate, the world largely still agrees on the destination. The crisis is the execution gap. Transitioning to a sustainable world requires us to move past high-level speeches that vanish as soon as it's time to pay the bill. It requires moving into the gritty reality of line-item budgets. It means empowering local mayors to take physical action. And it means accepting the mathematical reality that if we have n number of complex global targets, we must build n number of highly specific policy tools to achieve them.
And I'll leave you with this final thought to mull over, looking at the data we've unpacked today. If national governments remain paralyzed by their own shifting geopolitics and short-term election cycles, while local mayors across the globe aggressively step up to drive these transformations on the ground, could the future of global sustainability ultimately be driven not by a United Nations, but by United Cities?
Oh, wow. Now, there is a thesis topic for someone out there. Thank you for joining us on this Mission Green Deep Dive. It is a massive, incredibly messy group project that we are all a part of, but understanding the underlying mechanics of the syllabus is the first step to passing the class. Keep digging into the data, keep challenging the status quo, and keep asking the big questions. We'll catch you on the next deep dive.